Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. As we approach the end of our break from First Age Poetry on Fridays in this series, it's been a joy to include poetry here on Thursdays as I've been reading through and discussing some of the poetry in The Lord of the Rings. Now, we've looked at the mini versions of The Road Goes Ever On, The Other Walking Song, the Elven Hymn to Elbereth, 3 fun Hobbit tunes, the Barrow-Wight's Incantation, the Man of the Moon Stayed Up Too Late, the Riddle of Strider, the Fall of Gil-galad, and Aragorn's rendition of the Song of Beren and Lúthien. Today, we're going to wrap up Series 7's Third Age Thursdays with the second half of our two-part look at the Song of Beren and Lúthien, specifically looking into what ann-thennath is, breaking down the meter and rhyming scheme, and then looking at the prose version of the tale that Strider tells. Now, last week, after reciting the Song of Beren and Lúthien, Aragorn explained that it was a song in the mode that is called ann-thennath among the elves, but is hard to render in our common speech. Now, I thought I'd take a moment to talk about that, not too long a moment, before moving on into the prose summary of the tale that Aragorn provides the hobbits. Hammond and Skull offers some background on this term. In an essay called 3 Elvish Verse Modes in Tolkien's Legendarium, Essays on the History of Middle-earth, Tolkien linguists Patrick Wynne and Carl F. Hostetter, whose names you should know if you're interested in studying Tolkien's languages, pointed out that there is no evidence that Tolkien ever actually wrote the original Elvish poem said to underlie the translated version. However, Hammond and Skull assume that the original was in Sindarin because ann-thennath is Sindarin and consists of 3 elements. The first is and, meaning long, and showing up as an here. We see this in a lot of places. Anduin, long river, Anfalas, long beach, and even Caer Andros, ship of long foam. The second element is thent, which is defined as short in Parma Eldalamberon 17. Finally, the third element is the class plural suffix ath, like in Argonath, pillars of the kings, or literally royal stones, or Minhiriath, between the rivers. So we get long, short, plural. And that leads us to look at the metric mode of the poem. Now, in English, it's in iambic tetrameter. That's 4 pairs of unstressed and stressed syllables. Da-da, 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 da-da. Lord Byron's She Walks in Beauty is a good example. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. Thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. But in classical Greek poetry, iambic tetrameter was originally 4 pairs of alternating short and long syllables. That seems to be what the Sindarin term long-short is referring to. Now, I confess, as if it weren't obvious, to not being a poet. So that's honestly about all I can give you on ann-thennath. Let's go back to the story then and listen to Aragorn's prose retelling of the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Beren was a mortal man, but Lúthien was the daughter of Thingol, a king of elves upon Middle-earth when the world was young, and she was the fairest maiden that has ever been among all the children of this world. As the stars above the mists of the northern lands was her loveliness, and in her face was a shining light. In those days the great enemy, of whom Sauron of Mordor was but a servant, dwelt in Angband in the north, and the elves of the west, coming back to Middle-earth, made war upon him, to regain the Silmarils which he had stolen, and the fathers of men aided the elves. But the enemy was victorious, and Barahir was slain, and Beren, escaping through great peril, came over the mountains of terror into the hidden kingdom of Thingol in the forest of Neldareth. There he beheld Lúthien singing and dancing in a glade beside the enchanted river Escalduin, and he named her Tinuviel, that is, nightingale in the language of old. Many sorrows befell them afterwards, and they were parted long. Tinuviel rescued Beren from the dungeons of Sauron, and together they passed through great dangers, and cast down even the great enemy from his throne, and took from his iron crown one of the 3 Silmarils, brightest of all jewels, to be the bride price of Lúthien to Thingol her father. Yet at the last, Beren was slain by the wolf that came from the gates of Angband, and he died in the arms of Tinuviel. But she chose mortality, and to die from the world so that she might follow him. And it is sung that they met again beyond the sundering seas, and after a brief time, walking alive once more in the green woods, together they passed long ago beyond the confines of this world. So it is that Lúthien Tinuviel, alone of the elf kindred, has died indeed and left the world, and they have lost her whom they most loved. But from her the lineage of the elf lords of old descended among men. There lives still those of whom Lúthien was the foremother, and it is said that her line shall never fail. Elrond of Rivendell is of that kin, for of Beren and Lúthien was born Dior, Thingol's heir, and of him Elwing the White, whom Eärendil wedded, he that sailed his ship out of the mists of the world into the seas of heaven with a Silmaril upon his brow. And of Eärendil came the kings of Númenor. That is Westernesse. This is powerful stuff here. I mean, really, in a way, Aragorn has summed up 80% of the Silmarillion in a single, albeit long, paragraph. But what he doesn't explain here in this summary is just as important. His own direct descent from that union of Beren and Lúthien, even though he says it is said that her line shall never fail. He doesn't mention Arwen, nor does he mention the striking similarity between this tale and his own relationship with Arwen. As Paul Coker writes in Master of Middle-earth, none of the hobbits has the faintest glimmer of an idea why Aragorn chooses this particular legend to recite, and neither have we at first reading, thanks to Tolkien's failure to mention Arwen at all up to that point. But in the light of later revelations, it can dawn on us that the longing for Arwen is a torment, a joy, a despair, a comfort to Aragorn in a time of little hope. Small wonder that he is strange and grim at times, but he seldom speaks of the life of private emotions stirring within. And speaking of emotions, one day I'll talk about how deeply personal this story, or specifically its inspiration, was to Tolkien himself. For now, though, that wraps it up for this week's Third Age Thursday. Thank you for joining me. This has been a wonderful way to conclude this series as I prepare to return to First Age Fridays again next series, where we'll go back to reading through the Lay of Lúthien, and where I'll explain that Lúthien and Lúthien are not related etymologically. Now check out patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join my content council, get a bonus weekly episode, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for yet another Fandom Friday. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and everybody follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.